Hey everybody, welcome to Professional Editors Podcast, episode 107. This is part 2 of my discussion with Lichen Craig. Karen will be back with us after next week, where we have part 3 and the final part with Lichen Craig, an editor and author. So we'll just go ahead and get right into it. This is Lichen Craig and Dave Arney talking about the editing process and how to deal with editors. Then that's kind of getting into the next is, what kind of style, training, genre, market, and experience are you looking for? I know very specifically the genres and the markets that I am very helpful with, and I know the ones that I would not be as helpful with. So, for instance, I would not be able to do high fantasy very well. It's not something that I read a lot. It's not something that I enjoy to read when I do read it. And it's just not a genre and a market that I am well versed in, giving you the best advice possible. However,
Sure.
I do young adult and new adult. I rock at those, and I love working with them, and that's something that I'm passionate about. So there, when you get like Karen is an amazing copy editor, and she's going to be able to pretty much edit any text that you get at. But she's also not going to necessarily tell you some of the things that may have only to do with the marketability of the book, or have to do with, like she'll tell you with plot holes and things like that. So if you are looking for someone to give you some feedback on that, you'll want to make sure that you're working with someone who has the experience, the training, and the know-how to work with that genre or that market. That's another
Sure.
sort of factor to put into it. So like what do you prefer? If you have a preference, what do you prefer to work with genre and market
I
wise?
love that you brought this up because I think it's a good point. Editors are people, and we don't necessarily like to read something that's going to bore us to tears because it just doesn't happen to be up our alley. So I like to work with historical novels. I like to work, obviously, with gay and lesbian themed literature. I love literary novels because it just gets my blood flowing when I read something that's really beautifully written. Um, I I read history, nonfiction. I'll read anything animal related. I have some veterinary
Yeah,
degree
you and
background,
I both
so
are very fond of animals, I think.
yeah. So I'll read veterinary science. Doesn't scare me. I'll read that. But I do have my interest. The things that I won't read is I don't do vampires. I just don't do vampires. And I'm kind of like you. The futuristic fantasy stuff. It just isn't an interest of mine. But that being said, I have been in a position. I sit on the editorial staff of Wild Oats magazine, which is an online literary journal for material themed toward gay males. And we get, people that turn in short stories a lot that are futuristic, kind of the Star Trek
Hmm.
crowd,
Hmm.
and it's kind of interesting. But I end up reading a lot of those, and I have to say I've really enjoyed some of them. So I try to be open minded about it. But by and large, if someone's going to hand me a novel that is set 3,000 years in the future, and I'm just going to say, I'm not your gal, just
And
because of a personal preference.
hopefully your editor that you query to work with will read a portion of your manuscript, or look at your synopsis, and help you understand what they do or don't work with. But as this is a relationship, and we're kind of going to get into that in just a second here, but this is a relationship, and making sure that you get into the relationship with the right type of editor is just as important as how good they are at editing. And literary is I think, the greatest qualification. There are some really great editors that rip apart a literary work and actually make it worse. And
Yeah.
I've come after. I've been the second editor on a literary work that got ripped apart for the wrong reasons. And I too, I really enjoy literary work, but there's a soft touch that you need to take, because in some ways it's a little bit more artistic than, let's say, a Dan Brown thriller. And there's nothing wrong with writing a
Yes.
Dan Brown thriller. That
No.
obviously tons of people like them, and authors should want to write them. But it's a different type of editing. And yes, in a Dan Brown thriller, we're going to probably take out the passive voice as much as we find it. But when it comes to a literary piece, we have to look at a whole bunch of things that are going on at once. And yeah, so especially if you
Yeah.
have a literary piece, please make sure that you really talk to that editor and ensure that they're used to working with literary fiction.
That
And
they understand it.
yes.
And no, because you brought up a good point, David. Literary fiction is the kind of fiction that changes literature. That's its goal. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
it's doing experimental things with
It
language.
will break a lot of rules.
Yes, and that's its role. That's its role. It's probably the most creative of the genres.
So
And so
knowing when
you
to
really do.
pull it back and when to let it go forward is talent. Is it very much is talent, I think.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it takes someone who has some formal education, I think, in that genre and that background in order to understand it.
Well, I thought we
But
should talk a
but
little
the
bit.
point is,
Oh, sorry.
you know, that the point is, and you make a good one, is that there are different genres. They are all legitimate. You used you know, a crime novel genre as an example. Another would be a strict romance
Hmm.
novel.
Hmm.
And in order to be marketable, a romance novel follows a very specific formula. And a writer needs to understand that if they're going to write a romance novel that they want to sell to a publishing house, it needs to follow a very strict formula.
Or
And
even just sell directly to readers. I mean, the readers are
yeah,
savvy. They know what the formula
oh
is, and they know
yeah,
when you're breaking it.
yeah, and they don't like it.
And
But you
actually, it's
know,
funny. A
so
lot of romance readers, they really do enjoy it. You will hear people poo-poo formulas, but honestly, guys, I have a great many very intelligent friends who love to sit down with a trashy novel on a summer Sunday and just enjoy themselves. That's its purpose for them,
and
and I
there's
can't knock
nothing
that.
wrong with
I
that.
can't,
Yeah,
I can't knock that at all. So, besides the fact that romance writers are making quite a lot of good money right now. So,
yeah, yeah.
but I thought we should move on to the myths of working with an editor. And I think that most writers, when they're getting into it, may have never worked with an editor. They just
Yeah.
either they've never had the money in the case of freelancers, or if they're on the way to getting published and they haven't been accepted yet, then they haven't worked with a publishing house in an editorial staff. So I think that sometimes there's a lot of fear involved in the things that we don't know. So I thought that Lycan and I could kind of go through what working with an editor isn't, what some of the myths are, and then we'll sort of finish this off with how could you be productive if you do hire an editor. So the first myth that I ran into very recently is it's not ghostwriting, guys. We're not going to rewrite your story. Scripts, I think, are the only thing where you ever sort of have a complete rewrite that the original writer never sees again. And like, and you can correct me if
Yeah,
I'm
maybe
wrong on that,
so.
but
I
I don't think it
I
happens
think
anywhere
that
else.
I think that might be true in a certain context and in the developmental process of a script where it's getting ready to go to the point where it's being shot. And they might have a writer come in and rewrite it to very specific needs that the director and producers have at that point. But I would agree that sometimes it's taken completely out of the writer's hands, and
But
that's
I've never seen that happen with
yeah.
a novel or a
No,
short story.
nor should it. Nor
Yeah,
should it. Yeah.
that's not. And in fact, and if you actually want to be technical, those are script writers that are being hired. Those are not script
Yes.
editors that are being hired. Um,
Those are script writers. Yeah.
so no,
It's a
we're not
second
going to.
second writer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're
It's a
not going to
second writer.
rewrite your manuscript. And in fact, depending on the writer's style, I think that a lot of us just make notes. We don't actually even edit the
Yeah.
document necessarily. We will
I
simply
don't.
highlight things that need to be changed and make a note as to how they need to be changed. But
And
even something as
why?
simple as
Yeah.
changing a period to a comma, I mean, I don't know very many editors who will actually make that change. Rather, they'll highlight it and leave a note that it
Yeah.
needs to be changed.
I actually worked with a novelist that, you know, after we had gotten two-thirds of the way, she said to me, she said, you know what? Just change what you think needs to be changed, because she had gotten to the point where she trusted me that much. But by and large, I think that you're correct. Now, the way I work and the way I think a lot of editors work is that I'll mark the change, what should be changed. Let's say it's, you know, changing a comma to a semicolon. I'll mark it and I'll put in the margin. you might want to use a semicolon here, and this is why.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
really enjoy the teaching aspect of it. I'm trying to help the person be a better writer and understand how to use language better. That's the whole reason I'm an editor. That's what's fun for me. So I give a lot of explanation and notes, and then let the writer go back and change it themselves. And another myth is that the editor's going to fix everything for you and your work is done.
Oh yeah,
And
no, that's a big
no,
myth.
your work has only begun. At the stage that it goes to the editor, they don't expect to do your work for you. They expect to look at it, tell you what some issues may be with it, mark those issues, and then it's up to you to go through the manuscript again and make those corrections or not,
And
as you wish.
selling your manuscript to a house, to a publishing house, a traditional publishing house, is very much the beginning of usually a year long process.
Yeah.
And please expect to get notes back on changes and things, even though they told you that they loved your story and they did. They are going to have things that they want to see different, and there will be battles from time to time, not knockdown drag out such as, but they will, the editor that you're working with at the house will be telling you these are the things that we kind of need changed in order for us to market this book, in order for us to sell this book. So yeah, even at a major house, your job does not stop when you sell the novel. Your job stops when you finally get it to the printers.
Yes, that's a good point. And maybe this is a time to say that if it's a business for the publishing house. It's a business. Their bottom line is, can they sell this book and will it make them money? That's the whole reason they exist. And if the way it's written isn't going to make them money, they're going to have issues with it, and there are going to be battles. Now, if you have written something that you feel fairly confident about, and it's not a huge issue to you whether it's a bestseller or not, you might want to think about independently publishing it, and staying away from publishing houses. And that's a subject for another
Yeah, that's definitely a
day.
subject for another podcast. But no, it's something to consider. Is that the I think the misnomer with professional. I'm sorry, I don't mean to use that word. I mean to use traditional publishers, is that there's sort of a mystique surrounding them. It is very nice to have an editor and a managing editor at a publishing house say that they like your story and they want to publish it. And in some ways, yes, they're giving you a credence, but they're giving you credence that it's marketable, not necessarily that it's amazing and wonderful and the next best thing since James Joyce. And on top of that, there it's not over and done with. Like we said, there's a whole bunch of things that come into it. But back to sort of more of the myths of working with editors, and we're talking about both traditional houses and freelance editors in this case. Queries are back and forth between the editor and the author, and the editor isn't querying to challenge you. It's not really an ego thing. What they're doing is trying to get a better sense of what is going on at this point in the manuscript so that they can give you their best professional advice on the subject. So
Right.
queries are a great process. Don't dread them, love them, because that's the editor reaching out to you and getting the chance for the both of you to be on the same page. That's sort of the foundation of the relationship, because oftentimes it is sort of asynchronous. You send them something, they send you something back. You respond, they reply. So I think that queries are there to say, hey, tell me more, or I don't understand this, or what is the purpose of this and that,
Yes.
and then
And
together,
it,
hopefully, you create something better.
right. And there should be an ongoing dialogue between the two of you if it's a good process. I have an example of that might help people understand what we're saying. Um, I was working on a novel, and this was a first time novel, and this person kept capitalizing where she didn't need capital nouns.
I
And
was a
and I
big capitalizer when I first started
Yeah.
writing.
Well, but this is interesting. I kept knocking down the caps and making notes and saying, "Hun, you don't need to capitalize this. You don't need to capitalize this type of noun, and this is why." And there were so many of them. And I said to her finally at a point, um, let's have an elementary, just kind of capitalization 101 here. Let's talk about it because somehow you missed it in third grade. And and I was joking with her, and she took it with humor, but I said, let's talk about the capitals because they're really bad. It turned out that she finally admitted to me, and she was a little shy about it, but it turned out that she had done that very specifically because she wanted to add in an element of kind of a fairy tale feel
Hmm.
to the story.
Hmm.
And once she said that to me, I just kind of went, "Oh." And I said, "You know what? I like that." And then it was so cute because she was at a point where she was saying, "Well, I'll take all the caps out. I mean, you're right, and they look awful, and I'm going to take them out." And then I was saying, "No, let's put them back in."
Oh,
so,
that's brilliant.
so
Yeah, no,
it
I
was
love that.
kind of funny. It was kind of funny, and she's ended up putting them back in. But it if we had never had that conversation, we wouldn't have been able to kind of um, get to the point where she had that really creative and I think innovative element in there that makes the story kind of special.
That's there's the
So,
there's the lesson here is don't be afraid to push back to the editor. It's a
ah,
relationship. It is not a one-way street. Don't be
yeah,
afraid to say to the editor, no, I disagree with you. And have some sort of conversation because, as like I just showed you, sometimes it leads to something really great. And the other thing is that you're paying us for our professional opinion. You're not paying us to tell you what to do. You
yeah,
are very much free to reject any of the changes that we suggest,
yes,
and
yes,
that is your right. That is how it works. There may be some houses out there. There may be some publishing houses out there that make typo changes on their own, but I highly doubt it. I have not heard of them. It's up to the author, even at a traditional publishing house, to make simple things like there's a missing period. They will wait for the author to make the change and then send it to the typesetters. So
yeah.
it is up to you, and especially if you're hiring a freelance editor, it is very much up to you to accept or to reject it. But obviously, please don't hire an editor and then not listen to anything that they say. You're wasting your money and the editor's time. Um, they are trying to give you their best opinion.
It's a delicate balance. It's you have to be able to be open-minded enough and get past your ego as a writer enough, and I say that as a writer, and I know that ego exists,
Yes.
and I understand it, believe me. But you have to be able to get past it enough to hear what the editor's saying and really consider what they're saying. And at the same time, respect your own voice and your own commitments and know why you did what you did, and as David said, not be afraid to sort of have that conversation. And if you have an editor worth their price, um, they will be willing to negotiate with you. They're not going to dig in their heels and say, no, it's my way or the highway. I know what I'm doing and you don't. You don't want to work with someone like that.
Yeah,
you
I mean,
know
there are editors who will do that, and it's not my position to criticize other editors. We are simply saying that for us, when we work with our clients, and the vast majority of people that we know when they work with their clients, it's a relationship. It's something that you want to set up to be productive and two-way and all those kind of things. And
right.
I mean, there is a writer who does want a dictatorial editor to work with. Maybe that's what they need. But for the vast majority, I think the creativity flows best when it's a two-way street. Which kind of leads
Yeah.
us to the only negative point that I'm going to make, and I think in this podcast, is that just because someone has an English degree or knows grammar, they are not necessarily an editor. It's a
Yes.
word that gets thrown around a little bit. We're talking about, and the reason this podcast even is called Professional Editors, is because there's sort of a commitment that all of us make, not only to our own self-education, but to the clients that we're working with. I don't know, maybe it's the Hippocratic Oath in a way, but we're there to assist you in your creative process and not to harm it. And sometimes when you have someone who simply knows English, or thinks they know grammar, that comes to a piece without that sort of humility, I think, on their part, they can end up hurting the creative process. And that's
Yes.
something that you should be careful of. Everyone who says they're an editor may not necessarily be an editor. So please do use very good judgment, especially when you're hiring one, to make sure that you see their credentials. Most of them will do a sample read for you so that you can see the style of their editing. I mean, that's just as important. If their queries make your hair stand on end, then maybe that's not the best editor to work with. So yeah, do be a
And
little bit cautious and business-like when you're creating these contracts.
we should define sample read for people,
Oh
and
yes, that's a good
what we
point.
mean. What we mean is, I think I work the way that most editors do is if you contact me through, let's just talk about what the process is. You contact me through email and you say, I wrote this book and I'm not sure what to do now and I'm not sure if it's any good and help me. What I do is I'll write back and I'll say, this is my fee schedule. What I do is I'll read the first 3 chapters of your book and we'll talk about whether I want to take it on as a project and whether it's a fit for you as well. And there is no charge for that.
And
And
I'm the same way, and
what
most
I
people
have,
I know are that way as well.
yeah, and what I have the opportunity as an editor to do then is to go through those first 3 chapters, put my notes in the margins as I usually do, just like I'm editing a manuscript, in chapter 20, and then pass it back to the author, and they get a chance to look at it and realize what I'm doing and what I'm not doing. And at that point, it's a good exercise for me because at that point they realize I'm not interested in changing their voice or style. I'm not interested in rewriting it for them. I'm interested in pointing out the structural issues, and if there are any grammar or punctuation issues, we go through those. And I'm there to teach them, and I'm there to make it a better manuscript for them. And I think that the first 3 chapters make that clear to them, and I can honestly say 99% of the time I have a job after that. But that's how it usually works. So you can usually get an editor to look at the first 2 or 3 chapters of your book free of charge, and you'll have the opportunity to kind of get a feel for their style through
And
that
of course,
process.
if you're quoting them over a short story, it's probably going to be a smaller length.
Yeah.
The idea is that most editors will sort of want to, and I think in this case, want to see your work to know whether or not they can work with you. And please don't be offended if the editor gets back to you and says, "I'm sorry, this isn't something that I can work with." They're not saying that you're bad or wrong or horrible. They're saying that this is a relationship that they don't feel they are appropriate to form with you in regards to this process. And that's okay too. Hopefully, the editors are a little bit more sensitive to the dynamics that they work well with and the dynamics that they don't. So that it's the first time that you're working with an editor and you don't know what to expect, at least they've got the experience to kind of help you make the choice or to make another choice instead. This has been part 2 of 3 of my discussion with Lichen Craig on working with editors. Tune in next week for the final part where we discuss a little bit more about the positive sides and how to work best with an editor. You can always catch us on Google Plus on the Professional Editors page. Both Karen and I are available on Google Plus as well.